Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to this special meeting of the Attleboro School Committee this Thursday, December 17th, 2020. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. And at this time, I will turn it over to Superintendent Sawyer for his report.
Thank you, Chairman. Oh, I got some reverb there. Try that again. I thought I should begin tonight by reviewing the decision today to operate remotely tomorrow. So if you haven't heard, although with our new Remind system, I'm hoping that everyone has heard, tomorrow the district will be in a remote mode, which means that students who are in cohort B will be in remote instruction with their teachers, and students who are in cohort A will be having a remote day like they've been having throughout the hybrid schedule. There will be work for them in Google Classroom. The decision to go remote tomorrow is not one we take lightly. We always want to have students in the building. We would have liked to have had them today, but I don't think there are too many people who believe that was possible. But I do understand why many people question why it is that we can't bring people in tomorrow. I'd like to point out that we are not the only district in the area that will be doing this tomorrow. So this is not a problem that is particular to Attleboro. I think that this storm presented some particular challenges to cities and towns across the region. And I'd also point out that this is not a new problem, right? Attleboro historically has challenges when we have major snow events to get everything ready and safe for students to be able to travel to school. That has been a persistent problem, and tomorrow is just another instance of that. But I thought I would have Mr. Furtado maybe shed some light into some of the details as to why exactly this is a problem that we face with some regularity.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. So our folks have been actually in since about 4 a.m. Working on getting stuff cleared. We had, if you had to shovel the snow at your house, you're aware, the stuff was pretty heavy. We lost a front end loader during the day. We didn't. One of our vendors, Liston, did. So we've had some equipment issues, and are still right now working on clearing. When the superintendent made the decision to go remote tomorrow, but have the buildings open, we're going to still be scrambling right through the morning, trying to get what we like to say is down to pavement. That we probably won't get there for the morning, but the buildings will certainly be accessible for staff to report to their buildings. In addition to all of that, we don't do all this work alone. We work in conjunction with the city. They have the same kinds of challenges we have, equipment issues and prioritizing certain parts of the city to try to get things operational as quickly as they possibly can. So we, there are still some concerns with sidewalks and some streets around the schools that, that in conjunction with where we were at, strongly suggested that we don't come in tomorrow with students.
Are there any questions we can answer for the committee this evening regarding tomorrow?
Anyone? No?
Okay.
I don't see any.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the topic for this evening's special meeting. As some of you may be aware, today was another report day for the state. Attleboro's numbers went up again. We're at 63 today, up from 53 per 100,000 last week. Our positivity rate is 9.13, which is, I believe, technically lower, but pretty par with where we were a week ago. So Before I get into the details of all the things that I think that the committee needs to consider as it decides how to proceed under these conditions, I just want to say that you know, one of the challenges that I think as at the beneath all of the things that we've been facing throughout this particular school year is that there is a great deal of uncertainty because we don't know whether the conditions in the city will get better or worse, because we don't know what the science is going to say about what's safe and what isn't. The general lack of certainty that underlies all of our work, I think, casts a pretty dark cloud over all of our decision making and makes it difficult for people to feel confident about what to expect and feel like that they have the strength and know-how to get from here to there. And so I'd like to start by just trying to help establish some clarity for the remainder of the school year, because I do think some things are coming into focus for us that will help us to communicate to families and to our staff about what they can expect. And you have some decisions to make about exactly what they should expect. But I do believe that we can start making decisions that will set a course that we can execute with some good faith moving forward. And I'm going to start at the end, which is to say that, everyone I think is familiar with the governor's messaging about the need to return to full in-person learning in schools. And, we've talked a little bit about why that's not currently feasible. But as the state has released its phased plan for vaccination, and we now know that educators are expected to be vaccinated in the period between mid-February and mid-April. And the plan, if everything goes as people hope it will, would be that we'll all be vaccinated by that mid-April time period. So when you add that to the fact that the president-elect has also sent some strong messages about his belief that we need to return students fully in person, and that it is a priority of his incoming administration to get that done within his first 100 days. I think there is reason to believe that with support from the federal government, with national leadership, with local leadership and support, and then the changing conditions, both with improving weather, which hopefully will be accompanied with improving viral conditions, plus the vaccination of our staff. I think there is cause for optimism that sometime in the spring, after April, we can start to, be conceiving of moving back to a full in-person situation. Now, to anyone who's worried about rushing into that, we're not going to even contemplate that until several factors are different from they are today. But in terms of the long-range prognosis, there is cause for hope that perhaps we'll be back in time for the seniors to graduate. And I think that that's a really, really positive thing to even hope. And there have been times during this school year where that did not feel like that was a possibility. So in that sense, things are improving. And, I think we need to keep our eyes on the prize that, late spring does promise some hope for us. Moving back from that, in the early spring, we're going to be facing a situation where we are vaccinating our staff over a period of, roughly 8 weeks. And so, during that period, I think we know and can say pretty definitively that everyone can expect that we will stay in a hybrid mode during that period. We'll have quite a bit of work to do to prepare ourselves to be in a place to even talk about returning fully in person. And so through that period, hopefully with improving conditions, we will be able to maintain what we were able to do during the fall. So that brings us back to the winter, which is what we are now, after this week, I think officially in. Well, not officially, but certainly experientially. And here is where I think we have to be very realistic about what we're facing. In talking with the health department, there is good reason to believe that things are not going to improve from a viral spread perspective. during the period between Christmas break and February break. They are anticipating that things will be as bad as they are, or not, if not worse, during this period. I got a strong indication that that is the perspective from the federal government as well, in talking with representatives from member-elect Auchincloss in a meeting with him. So we are about to enter into what, by all accounts, will be the most challenging phase of this school year. And I think we need to think about how to proceed from it with the knowledge that, unlike other points in this process where we face challenges without an end in sight, without any real understanding of what the back end of any time period would look like. Tonight's discussion, I think we can have that with some confidence that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And while there is a long way to go from here to there, we should put into perspective that whatever decisions we're making, they are short-term decisions, and that there's good reason to believe that we'll have a completely different set of conditions to be operating from in the near future, but that things will be more challenging before they get better in the period that we're about to face. So as we consider what to do this winter, the first thing I want to go back to that I've said multiple times, and I'm going to double down on it again. If we're going to just consider safety, if safety is the only barometer by which we make this a decision about how to proceed, then there's no reason to change course, because much to the consternation of some people who really vehemently disagree with what I'm saying here, I do not believe that the data that we have available to us supports the claim that our schools are unsafe. I have double checked this perception with our public health officials. I'm not a doctor. I've made that clear through all of these discussions. I am not qualified to make many of the determinations that have been made. But I do know how to look at data, and I do understand the systems that are being used to assess that data. And from that perspective, I just think it's really important to understand that this is not about safety within our schools. It's not about a threat from the virus. We do not have any instances of in-school transmission as of now. And again, I've said multiple times, I will be surprised if we get through this whole thing without having any. But the way the state measures these things, the way it does its work, they tell us that that's how we should look at this. And I do understand that as viral circumstances continue to increase in the community, the likelihood that there are more and more asymptomatic people around us is almost certainly the case. However, as I said at the last meeting, I don't think you can make a case that, given that we have had so many test cases with positive cases that we do know about, and that none of them led to spread, I don't understand the presumption that somehow asymptomatic cases are spreading the virus in a way that we can't see, when we know that positive cases that we can see are not spreading the virus. And that's the basis for my confidence that that continues to be true, at least up until this point. I would also point out that there have been no clusters of positive cases in the district. When you have spread, you see multiple people being infected by exposure to a positive case. This is exactly what we see at the city level, as most of the spread in the community is through family spread. Someone gets sick, they bring it home, and then everyone in the house gets sick. Those clusters are a key feature of the virus, and we do not see that in our schools. And again, I've run this all by the health department, and they concur that they don't see any signs of transmission within the schools. So if it's just about concerns about transmission, if that's what this whole conversation is about, there's nothing really that we need to do differently. But I would argue that it's not just about that, that while transmission is a significant concern, and one that we have been very vigilant, and I'm very proud of everyone's hard work in keep getting the success that we've had to this point, there are other things that need to be considered as you think about what we should do next. Certainly, one of them is that we don't know whether our success can be counted on under different circumstances. So we know that up until this point, which, by the way, I would point out that the conditions that the city's facing right now are worse than they were in the spring, right? So things are very, very bad in terms of transmission in the city. And up to this point, we've been successful in stopping the spread. That does not mean that our precautions and the protocols that we count on to keep everyone safe are necessarily going to work at all levels. And while I think there's good data to suggest that wearing masks and distancing is the key to our success and keeps people safe, I do think we have to worry about at what point does increased numbers erode the effectiveness of these measures. But I think a more direct concern that we really, really need to contemplate is that clearly, from my perspective, ventilation is a huge part of our success. We're hearing from experts over and over again that masked people in well-ventilated areas, don't transmit the disease under normal circumstances. So, if you say, well, how did we get through all this so far without in-school transmission? I think the answer is that everyone's masked. We put as much distance as we could, and we made sure the rooms were well ventilated. Well, we're about to enter into a new phase in which it's too cold to do some of the things that help to have our ventilation be as effective as it was. And so now, while we are confident that we're going to keep the guidelines of winter ventilation, we're going to uphold those. I don't know that we can say definitively that we, have evidence that these changes in the environmental conditions in our buildings won't have some sort of impact on the effectiveness of our measures. So I do think we have to worry about, just because we've been successful to now does not mean we necessarily will always be successful. To switch to another topic, we're about to go into a holiday break. And if Thanksgiving is any indication, and we believe it is, of people's behavior, then we should absolutely interpret that many people are not going to adhere to the guidance to not travel, which again, people have a right to travel. No one is, trying to shame anyone for their travel. But the real problem is that not only are people not adhering to that guidance, which is a choice, they are not adhering to it when they return. They're not acknowledging that they traveled, and they are sending their kids to school. We've had several people do this, and that is not a choice. And so this is a threat to our safety. And speaking with our, the health department, they share the concern that there's going to be more travel over Christmas break than there was at Thanksgiving, and that if we know anything, it's going to cause more transmission. And we do know that people are going to ignore the guidance to quarantine when they return, and they're going to go about their daily lives, which includes some people sending their kids to schools and hoping that nobody knows where they were over the week. So this is a very serious concern, and one that I'll circle back to when I make my recommendations. But I think it's important to know that while we all would like to assume everyone's good intentions, I think there's just too much evidence that we can't count on everyone to adhere to this. As I talked about pretty extensively at our last meeting, we have real staffing problems under current viral conditions. The number of staff members who are either sick or have tested positive or are quarantined either because of contact in their lives outside of school or as a result of being exposed inside of school is having a tremendous strain on our schools and our staff and our ability to operate and to deliver a quality education. Not only is it extremely difficult for our principals to make sure that there is an adult in every room in every one of our classes in our buildings each day, it's also a disruption to learning that the way that they cover these buildings is by pulling educators from the delivery of services to cover classrooms. They pull paraprofessionals. They pull people who are available, and as a result, I mean, those people have assignments in which they are serving kids, and instead of providing that service, they're now covering a class that we don't have a sub for. I think that these conditions are very troubling. They're having a real negative impact on our ability to deliver the high quality education that I think people have come accustomed to. And it's certainly affecting the morale of everyone who works in the district. We've limped through to Christmas. We've only had one instance where we had to close a building, but there's no reason to believe that we won't have others, because there have been multiple days where we were, one person away from having to close a school. So that is a major concern while viral conditions are as high as they have been. And now we have to add a new concern. And we've talked a little bit about it, but under the guidance for ventilation, we need to bring in more fresh air than is normally the case, right? So we have to mix in 15% fresh air, and we have to ensure 4 to 6 air exchanges an hour in our classrooms to ensure the proper ventilation of the rooms. We also, in rooms that, in schools that have windows that are designed to be opened, and we have 4 schools that's not the case, but in the other 5, you're also supposed to keep a window open, and how wide that window open is also affected by whether or not you have an air purifier in the room as well. So the city did order for the schools enough air purifiers for the entire district. We hope to have those very soon. So that will help in that we can keep the windows only open a crack rather than much more fully open. But when you start talking about open windows and 15% fresh air and 4 to 6 air exchanges, that is going to have a significant impact on temperatures in the building, as we've discussed before. In anticipating what's coming in January, I just want to remind everybody that January is the coldest month in New England, right? The middle 2 weeks of January are on average the coldest 2 weeks of the year. And while average temperatures are around 36 degrees, which we are hopeful that we can maintain those temperatures. You might be aware that yesterday we had school, and it was a remote day, so students weren't in the buildings, but we did have teachers in the building yesterday, and the temperatures were in the 20s. Because the kids weren't there, we didn't have to have the windows open, so we actually got through the day with pretty decent temperatures. But as an indication of what's to come, we should all expect that our systems are going to be severely strained by these new constraints, and they're not designed to be effective. Especially when we start to get into a period where if you have a cold snap over a series of days, just like when we have a heat wave at the beginning of the year, and that each hot day successfully makes the building hotter the next day, if we have a cold snap in January, each successive day will make the building slightly colder because we'll be starting each day from a less warm temperature starting point. So we have real concerns about that if we follow the guidance, which is not an if, right? We are definitely going to follow the guidance that when our systems are up against potentially cold weather, that we're not going to be able to keep the buildings warm enough. And I've heard editorial comments on the side. Oh, what's the big deal? Put on a coat. And to a certain degree, yes. I mean, I think everyone is prepared to grapple with lower temperatures than are normal. I don't think there's too much pushback on the idea that people would rather be safe than as perfectly comfortable as they can be. But there is a point at diminishing returns where temperatures fall to a point that it not only becomes, unhealthy for everyone in the room, but also becomes a real impediment to learning. And, I think one of the things that we have to accept here is that while we very much want to be open, we know that families depend on us to be open. I'm not sure what good we're doing them or their children if we have them sitting in rooms that are too cold to focus or to be functional. So the last thing I would point out is in our discussions with the health department, one of their points that they really wanted to make is that the way the state thinks about issues and its policymaking is somewhat insensitive to the fact that a place like Attleboro is a border community. Their perspective on things is somewhat indifferent to the reality that, right along Attleboro's border is, one of the hottest spots in the entire world. And it certainly helps to explain our high numbers. But the fact that there are people moving across that border every day, and we have many of them who work in our schools, is a factor in the spread of the virus here locally that most of the state does not have to grapple with, and therefore is something that our health department thinks needs more attention and consideration than is getting. And they also wanted me to pass along that they fully expect another holiday spike with Christmas, as I had mentioned before. So to sum this all up, we're about to enter into what, by many experts' perspective, is going to be the most challenging period for the virus that we've had to date. At that same time, we are having the most difficult time simply operating the building from a staffing perspective, and there's good reason to worry that we're not going to be able to keep buildings open due to temperature concerns on any given day. Now, as I said, average temperature is around 36. We're hopeful that 36 is something that we can handle. But, as as New Englanders, you can get periods where you have temperatures in the 20s. And so what we're envisioning is that as we get into January, we're worried that parents are going to be experiencing that day in and day out, they can't count on whether or not their school is going to be open, because whether it's cold temperatures or a staffing problem or too many positive cases in a building, that we're going to be opening and closing sections of the district throughout this period, on and off, in a way that's extremely disruptive and I think very, very frustrating. And so my recommendation to the committee this evening is that I believe, first and foremost, the 2-week period after Christmas, we should switch the district to a full remote mode. We have every reason to anticipate that there'll be another spike related to travel during Christmas. And I think the best way to keep everybody safe during that period is to operate remotely. But when you think about this entire 6-week period between Christmas and February break, I think there is reason to believe that the 4 weeks that follow that have the potential to be equally disruptive for other reasons, including most notably the ones that I've discussed. So I think that we should let the community know that this is the 6-week period that is going to be our greatest challenge, and that everyone should anticipate and plan for the need to be remote, and that the best way we could provide a stable and dependable learning environment is to treat this 6-week period as if we're going to operate remotely. Now, we have 2 school committee meetings in January, and I think that those would provide excellent opportunities to reevaluate the situation, to see whether these concerns really have borne out the way that we had anticipated they would. And I would be the first to say that if things are better than we fear they will be, we would bring students back sooner and as soon as possible. But rather than keep a stiff upper lip and tell everyone we're going to keep trudging on and then go through a period in which we're in and out of school like a roller coaster, I think it would be better to tell people it might be as bad as 6 weeks. It won't be worse than 6 weeks. And people should plan for 6 weeks. And if we can come back sooner than that, we absolutely will. But I think, it starts with that first 2-week period, which I believe is a must.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. Is that everything on this issue from you?
That is, thank you.
Okay. I appreciate the information, the recommendation. I absolutely agree, as I've said before, that, nothing to date makes me feel at all that the schools are unsafe. I continue to feel that they are safe. And in fact, students may very well be safer in schools than they are, when they're home and socializing with children. But I do with other students and children. But I also, understand the logistical issues and our need to provide an adequate and proper education for our students, and the fact that there are issues other than safety that can impact our ability to do so that we need to take into account and would make going remote necessary for a period of time. While I usually, it's been my history or my procedure generally not to be the one to make motions. I did confirm I am entitled to do so, and given the gravity of the situation, I am going to make a motion tonight. And I would state that given the need to provide the most stable and reliable learning environment for all our students, and the anticipated logistical and educational concerns that would be experienced by Attleboro Public Schools continuing in the hybrid model in January, I move that Attleboro Public Schools transition to full remote learning beginning January 4th, 2021 through at least January 15th, 2021, and ending in no event later than February 13th, 2021. At both the January 11th and January 25th school committee meetings, the administration and the school committee will review the updated number of close contacts, quarantines, and infected Attleboro Public School community members, as well as other logistical and relevant concerns. If the school committee does not vote to return to hybrid learning at those meetings, then Attleboro Public Schools would remain in the remote model, with said remote model again to end no later than February 13th, 2021.
Steve, before there's a second, can I answer your question?
Why don't we get the motion in second, and then we can have discussion.
All right, never mind.
Second.
Mr. Storrs?
To me, the default should be that we're in school. I don't like the idea that what you just did was you made it that unless we do a new motion, they stay, they're remote. I think before the second, I was trying to see if you'd be willing to change that where it would have been for the 2 weeks with the plan to come back. And then at the 11th January meeting, if a new motion was needed at that time, a new motion could be made.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's clear that you and I are in agreement that the kids should be back in school as soon as possible. And my hope would be that after 2 weeks, they're back. I think that, one of the things to consider is parents and community's ability to plan. I think that either way, it's going to take a 5-4 vote one way or the other. You're right in that this will take a 5-4. This motion would take a 5-4 vote to bring us back to hybrid learning as opposed to remote learning, staying in remote learning. It's 6 one way, half dozen the other. I understand your concerns. I just felt that given the nature of the committee's positions in the past, the call for the special meeting and the concerns of members who had called the special meeting in anticipation of discussion today, that this was the best motion to ensure that this committee will meet and discuss every 2 weeks and hopefully bring students back as soon as possible. And
Just to clarify, that your motion effectively means we will be full remote from the beginning of January until whenever the committee decides to vote again to bring us back hybrid.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, again, as opposed to the committee the committee having to vote to stay remote.
Right.
Yeah, it'll take 5 votes to bring us back to hybrid, which again, I would imagine I would be one of the first ones to cast that vote to go back hybrid. I just think that to get a 2 week period as opposed to a longer period to start, that phrasing the motion in this way was necessary. Mr. Geddes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had some comments and a couple of questions, but one of the questions was relevant to Mr. Stores's concern. Mr. Sawyer, what would the timeline be for educators and families? What's the timeline you envision for folks to return to hybrid? I know when we talked before about going from hybrid to remote, you felt like students needed to be in school at least once or twice before going to remote. What's your timeline for, what would your timeline be for getting folks back if we were to vote to go back to hybrid as early as January 11th?
So the school committee meetings very conveniently fall in the middle of the 2-week periods, if you think of them as 3 2-week periods. So if on, I believe it's Monday, the 11th, which would be the first meeting, that's the first day of the second week of what I would say is the most critical 2-week period. And by the way, that's what the health department said as well, is that, you know, we should really, I mean, they urged us to consider going remote for 2 weeks and then evaluate whether or not it makes sense to come back or not. So if on the 11th, we felt like things were better than we were expecting, I think it would be easy to bring people back the following week. So I believe that next Monday is a holiday though. So it would be that Tuesday, the 19th. And then likewise, the 25th, we could bring them back the following Monday. I think that week's notice, especially if everyone understands that at each checkpoint, you're basically assigning up, you're basically committing to another 2 weeks. To the point of the conversation between Chairman Withers and Mr. Storrs, whether you're voting to get in or voting to get out, ultimately what we're saying here is everyone should be prepared for 6 weeks if it comes to that. But, the district is going to consider this at 2-week intervals. And the meetings line up very nicely to allow us to do that because we could return the following week.
Yeah, and to be clear, my plan would be on both the 11th and the 25th meetings to have in-depth discussions on the number of students and teachers that are currently in quarantine or sick, and issues about the temperature and logistical issues, and to have a motion at each meeting to come back in person, and if the data seems to indicate that we can, as hopefully it will, then hopefully we would vote to come back at that first meeting. But that would be a motion and a discussion that we will certainly have at both meetings. Any other questions or discussion? Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So if we do choose to go to a full remote method of delivering the content, what would a student's typical day look like? Are we still going to adhere to cohort A, cohort B? Is it going to be more of what we typically experience on a Wednesday? How would their learning differ from what we're seeing today? Obviously, other than not having the 2 days in person.
Mr. Sawyer, you want to take that?
Ms. Reed is going to jump in with this one, I think.
All right, thanks.
So thank you for the question, Ms. Johnson. At the high school level and the middle school level, the students will follow their daily schedule. So they'll meet at the start of each period virtually with their entire class, and then they'll break out into small and large groups after that. And then at the elementary level, students will be meeting 3 times a day for a whole group session. They'll be meeting in small groups with their teacher, and then they'll also be doing some independent work. So it'll be a combination of all types, independent, small group, and whole group for each level.
So would you say it's similar to what they're experiencing on a typical Wednesday, or maybe somewhat different from what they're currently experiencing on a typical Wednesday?
I think if at the elementary level, it'll look like a typical Wednesday with just a different schedule. At the middle school and high school level, they'll be following their traditional schedules that they would do on an in-person day.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Domenici, did you have a question?
Actually, Ms. Johnson kind of jumped in there. my hope is that for whatever time that we're remote, and like you, Chairman, my hope would be that based upon the parameters by which we would consider this, that it's a very short amount of time. For that amount of time that's remote, I think there should be opportunity to get as much teacher-led learning as possible for any days out. We've heard a lot of that from parents. We've heard from teachers who said that they're capable of being able to do it. So I just want to reinforce it where I think my colleague was going, in that, though I hope it's not for a prolonged period of time, assuming we vote that way, for that amount of time that we may be considering remote, we should take as much advantage as possible to get as much in teacher learning as possible, considering that if folks are remote, then potentially any bandwidth issues we may have with trying to do that type of learning now is not an issue for that time frame.
Other questions or discussion, Mr. Geddes to Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also, Mr. Sawyer, for your report and all of the different perspectives and considerations that you're putting into this recommendation. I think none of us thought we'd make it this far with the hybrid model at the beginning of the year. And as we've gotten this far, everything you said, something you said earlier was that we're about to go into the most challenging part of the year, which I think is saying something given where we've been so far this year. So thank you again, and thank you to the educators again for continuing to weather the storm and guide us through this as much as possible. I did have one question about, two questions. One, a very quick one. As far as guidance around testing for families that do decide to travel, is it that families that travel have to be tested within 72 hours of return or after 72 hours?
I believe the answer to that is after.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then along lines of Ms. Johnson and Mr. Domenici's question and comments, what are the other ancillary services that will still be in person, whether that's special ed, CTE, or food service options for families, things like that?
So for the first 2 weeks, we wouldn't have anybody in the buildings as related to the concerns around the implications of travel. After that, we would be bringing back students in certain programs. I know that the high school has worked on a plan to allow for our CTE students to get time in their shops. And I know that our EL department has plans to bring students back, and it is my belief that it's still the plan for certain other programs to be able to bring students back, but that's on a program by program basis based on what people think is best for the needs of those particular students.
Yes, and if I may, Rob, the school lunch program will be operating throughout this period the way it did in the spring. So you can come to the principal's entrance at the high school and get a breakfast and lunch every day.
Thank you.
That's
Mr.
between
Storrs?
the hours of 11 and 1.
I'm sorry, I stole your thunder there, Mr. Furtado. Can you say that again?
Yeah, the lunches will be available between the hours of 11 and 1 at the principal's entrance at the Attleboro High School every day while we are in remote.
Thank you. Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things, if I could. The first thing is, I too have concerns regarding the increases that we see after a holiday break. After Thanksgiving, we definitely saw an increase, and obviously, we expect to see the same thing after the winter holidays, after Christmas and other holidays. I still feel schools are safe, but I came into this knowing that I might be able to support a 2-week the January 4th through the January 19th. As I said before, I would much rather much rather have a motion where the default is in school and not the default out of school, and having to revote to stay in the remote rather than have to vote to come back. But I can say that if I do support this, I'll be looking to immediately vote to come back as soon as it looks like it's safe. The questions that I do have is, number one, when will the air purifiers be coming in? Because you had mentioned those as part of the safety, but you also said that they're coming in soon. So what is soon? And then I have another question right after that.
So there were, Mr. Furtado, you want to jump in on this?
Sure. So one of the requirements of the funding for the air purifiers that the city used is that they have to be here before the end of this year. So they've got about another week and a half.
So will they be in before January?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They have to be.
All right. So they're not an issue. So bringing them up is not really an issue because they're going to be in.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm not sure why. I understand that they were discussed as part of the solution, but the timing is not an issue. They're going to be in before the kids would get back on January 4th, if that's what we had gone for. My other question, Mr. Sawyer, I heard this from a constituent, so I thought I should ask it. They had indicated that their child came home and informed them that the teacher had told them that they were going to be out until after the full remote, until after the February break. Is there any reason why a teacher would have thought that, and let alone told that to their students?
So, I don't know why anyone does anything in particular. So I can't speak specifically to that case, but I am, in constant contact with the union to work through their many concerns about what teachers are experiencing through this. As I think the committee's well aware, the teachers think that we're at a point now that we should be at remote. For the people who don't believe we should ever go remote, I would say that, it's been a lot of work, a lot of hard work on both sides to get us to this point that we've had school in a hybrid mode for as long as we have. And so part of that is open communication with the union about where we think things are going and what we're talking about. I don't think anyone should or would presume the will of the committee, but that certain members might engage in some wishful thinking as not something that anyone can control, is what I would say on that.
Okay.
Mr. Storrs, I would, again, I would echo what you said, and that's, I'm looking to come back as soon as possible. And my hope, I see this as a rolling 2-week remote, where we're remote for 2 weeks, and then we come back and decide if we need to be remote for 2 more weeks, and we do it again if we have to for another 2 weeks. And we've definitively said that that ends with February vacation. I agree with you as well that there was a lot of rumors going around that the school committee was going to decide to go remote through February vacation, and that some students were told that, or in rumors. That's absolutely, that's one, we haven't decided anything yet, and two, that's not that's not what is intended by this motion. So to the extent those rumors were going around, they were incorrect, and to the extent they were being passed on in that way, that's, I would certainly say that was inappropriate. Any other questions, Mr. Larson?
Just going along with what you just said, it's fascinating to read the emails before meetings to see what we're going to do in other people's opinions, and it's fascinating sometimes to read the emails after the meetings to see what meeting somebody else was watching that I was at versus what they were watching. So I think that's just a function of the jobs that we have and the environment that we live in sometimes. I agree with the motion that I think based on what happened after Thanksgiving, we're going to have to take a break because the numbers and what people's habits were and what they did after Thanksgiving. There's no reason to think that they won't do that again during the Christmas and New Year break. So I think taking a 2-week break and then reevaluating is a smart thing to do. I was informed that part of the way through the superintendent's remarks, the cable station froze and it came back after you made your motion. So if you wouldn't mind rereading your motion before we vote on it, that would be appreciated.
When we're done with discussion, before we do the roll call vote, I'll restate the motion, which is probably appropriate anyway, given the complexity of the motion and the seriousness of the issue. So, but thank you for letting me know that.
Thank you.
Mr. Domenici?
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. One, Superintendent Sawyer, is it safe to assume that you will still be informed of any staff or student positive cases for any length of time that we're out? Because I just want to make sure we have the appropriate numbers when we come back to reassess these things.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we didn't have school today, but a good chunk of today was chasing down positive cases. There were quite a few of them, ironically. Yeah, that doesn't stop. That's 7 days a week. It's going to be that way for a long time.
Okay. And then just one last question, I guess more for Mr. Furtado. Would there be, again, even if it's a short period of time, would there be any consideration given to having a second point again of contact again, or another place within the city to potentially get lunches out to folks, whether it's just for the remote time or actually even considering the hybrid model? Because I get a lot of parents that ask that. I think sometimes there are some concerns with people's ability to get to the high school.
Yeah, again, we did that in the spring and it didn't prove to be very fruitful. We're happy to do it again. We want nothing more than to get lunches out there. So if there seems to be a demand, we're happy to give it a shot.
Okay, thank you.
At what facility would be the best, we'd love to hear that too.
Any other questions or comments on the specific motion, Ms. Sawyer?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Withers. I just want to thank the committee and the superintendent for the careful consideration. I feel like reevaluating it every 2 weeks is the safest point to take right now. Several people brought up questions that I had concerns with, and I'm glad they were addressed. But I do have one for Mark regarding the Purifiers. Now, I personally ordered something before Thanksgiving for a birthday for someone in my family, in the event that the air purifiers don't come by the end of the year.
Diana, thank you for bringing it back up, because after Jim's question, I got text from folks at the building. They were delivered tonight. So had they not come by December 31st, we would not be allowed to take them because they wouldn't be able to be funded. The funding wouldn't be there. So I believe when the city ordered them, they made that kind of provision very clear. If you can't deliver them, don't even try, because we won't have money to pay for them. So they were delivered today.
Excellent, thank you. And also, I also had received emails regarding the free lunches, and I feel that potentially a second pickup location would be good. Actually, one person emailed me and said they didn't even know that the free lunch was available. So I feel like maybe we should make that publicized for people that just don't even realize it. But thank you for your.
Thank you, Ms. Sawyer. Mr. Storrs.
Thank you, Mr. Withers. I'll try to make this my last one. With this issue, it seems like it's multifaceted. The one is the safety side of things. Arguments can be made that schools are safer than being at home. I would try to make that argument. I've been making it since August with all the other mental and emotional health issues and so on and so on. But the other issues are understandable. We know that they're spiking after holidays because people travel and people see their families, and very often they won't do the social distancing or the mask wearing and those kind of things when they're with family of that nature. So I do hope that families can try to be safe during the holiday breaks. The other one is the ventilation. So, when looking at the ventilation issue, I understand it's compounded by the temperature, but the temperature is not going to get much better between now and March. I mean, we're looking at 3 months. I'm hoping that this is not going to end up being some 3-month shutdown. 3 month remote shutdown of in-school learning. In-school learning should be the default. In-school learning is best. 2 weeks I can understand. Beyond that, it would be very hard for me to be able to support, but that's where I am. Thank you.
If I could, just two things on temperatures. One, if you think of middle January as the low point, if you go back out, it's relatively symmetrical in terms of the temperature. So, we're about 4 weeks away from the low point. So 4 weeks after the low point is kind of like things are now. So I don't think we're really looking at 3 months of problems. There's really just a very discrete section of the year in which prolonged cold temperatures are a real threat, and that happens to fall within this 6-week period. So I'm optimistic, and I'm always going. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a weatherman either, but I'm told that this is a El Nino year, and that under the El Nino we can anticipate slightly warmer than normal temperatures in late January and February. That's the general trend in El Nino. So there is some cause for hope that this year's period of cold will be a brief one.
Thank you. Mr. Geddes.
I had a follow-up question for Mr. Furtado, but before I do, I want to just respond to Mr. Storrs' comment. I don't think anyone on the committee disagrees with the idea that in-person is preferred at least sometime. And I think all of us, even as someone that made a motion to go remote at our last meeting, I hope that once we are remote, that we are back in person as soon as we feel like it is safe and feasible to do so. So I don't think you'll find too much disagreement with those thoughts. The question I had for Mr. Furtado, I just wanted to clarify. You had said that the air purifiers had arrived at the building. I'm guessing you meant that all of them arrived at the high school to be distributed, or they've all arrived at their individual buildings. I just want to make sure we have all of the air purifiers.
Yeah, the former, not the latter. They were all
Okay.
delivered either to the high school, and we will be distributing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. All right, then before we read the motion,
Chairman.
and do the roll.
Shannon,
Ms. Johnson.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. It's quite all right. It's quite all right. I just wanted to circle back because I had a little glitch in my connection when we were talking about students that receive special services. So if there are students that are receiving special services in our special education department, how are we going to address their services? Are they going to be able to come into the building, or did I hear that for that first 2-week period, we would not have anybody in the building?
We won't have anyone in the building for those first 2 weeks if we go remote in the first 2 weeks, but they will still receive services. I'll have Ms. Medeiros address this specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. So we have students currently now receiving remote services in whether even on in-person days. So they would we're required to provide special ed services per the IEP, unlike the spring, the minutes that are in the IEP. So they would receive those remotely. And our staff has been working hard since the spring to make those stronger and better all the time.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely echo what a lot of my other committee members are saying, in that I truly feel that as far as the virus transmission, that the schools are safe. The protocols that we have in place are working. So this would truly be a logistics issue. Should we find ourselves in a situation where we are extended for another 2 weeks with the remote learning, these students that receive special services, would they still be receiving these services remotely, or would they have the option to come in to receive their services in person? Or is that to be determined?
It would be determined, but we've been working with our staff and meeting with them, particularly we're required per DESE guidance to provide as many in-person services for our high needs programs. And we've brought in our moderate need programs in for 4 days. So we would be looking at it on a 2 week. Speaking to the staff, they really wanted to take the 2 weeks. We have numbers of students who cannot wear face coverings, who we know are traveling. So, we're cognizant of that, and we wanted to, like everyone else, really think about the first 2 weeks and then reassess as we go, if we need to extend it further. Or if the committee decided to extend it further, the programs would reassess, whether students could come back in.
Sure. I do have to say that the correspondence that I received from families at the beginning of the year was amazingly evenly split between remote versus any sort of in-person learning. And the correspondence that I received from families leading up to this meeting was very much weighted towards, we want our kids there, especially those kids that are receiving services, the students receiving services. So this is definitely not an easy decision to make tonight. Thank you, Ms. Medeiros.
And I'll just add that speaking to the staff, particularly in the high need programs, they want the students there. They recognize the challenges for the students and for families to receive services. So, I know that a lot of them are listening tonight, and I know that they would appreciate kind of that the committee would look at it in 2 week chunks and reassess that.
Sure. Yeah, and just I received so many compliments for the work that's done by your group. So just wanted to acknowledge that as well.
Thank you. I know they'll appreciate it.
Anyone else? Okay, so I would just say, closing comments from me. I certainly believe and have seen that the remote learning that goes on this year is much different than what we experienced in the spring. We should acknowledge that. I also, believe strongly that, remote education is, has proven not just in Attleboro, but throughout the country to be, far inferior to in-person education and inferior even to hybrid education when we can do that effectively. So what this motion, I think, really is about, in my mind, is, our inability, given the current situations, to continue in hybrid mode and provide that quality education that our students are entitled to, and the realization that at this point, remote learning, with all its flaws, for a period of time, is the best education we can provide our students. And so that is the purpose behind my motion. I certainly, my feelings on the safety of the schools has not changed, certainly at all. But at this time, I'll take a roll call. But before I do, I'll reread the motion so everyone remembers what we're voting on. And for those that are just who have tuned in since the motion was first made and seconded. Given the need to provide the most stable and reliable learning environment for our students and the anticipated logistical and educational concerns that would be experienced by the Attleboro Public Schools continuing in the hybrid model in January, I move that the Attleboro Public Schools transition to full remote learning beginning January 4th, 2021 through at least January 15th, 2021, and ending in no event later than February 13th, 2021. At both the January 11th and January 25th, 2021 meetings, the administration and the school committee will review the updated numbers of close contacts, quarantines, and infected Attleboro Public School community members, as well as other logistical and relevant concerns. If the school committee does not vote to return to hybrid learning at those meetings, Attleboro Public Schools would remain in the remote model to the next meeting, with the remote model to end no later than February 13th, 2021. And that motion was seconded. And so a yes vote would be to approve going into the remote model beginning January 4th for at least 2 weeks and continuing until the school committee voted to go back in hybrid, but in no event ending later than February 13th. So I will take the roll and I'll start with Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes, Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
All right, so the motion passes 9-0. I want to thank again the administration, and I want to thank the committee members for both their consideration and comments tonight, and really throughout, ever since March when this issue first arose, and really since August when we've been grappling with this throughout the school year. It has been an issue that's dominated these meetings, and I know dominated a lot of our time outside of these meetings. Though there's often been a lot of disagreement, I think it's clear that no matter what position one takes, everyone has treated this with real significance and importance. And, we enter this position for that purpose, to make important decisions. And, that comes with criticism, but, no one should doubt the intensity that everyone has considered these issues and addressed them. So I want to thank everyone for that. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Sawyer to continue his report.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. I would just like to thank the committee. I think that this is an appropriate course of action. I want to echo the desire to have students in schools, and I assure you that as soon as we can return them, and if that's after 2 weeks, that'll be what'll happen, because that's where we want them. But I think it is prudent to put families on notice that the next 6 weeks of returning from break are going to be a real challenge, and that there's a real possibility that we might need to operate remotely during that period. So that gives people appropriate time to plan. And as I tried to frame the conversation in the first place, I do think it brings clarity as we move forward. We know that we have a 6-week period coming that is going to be the most difficult of the year. And we can now count on taking the appropriate action to get through it as safely as possible, and with an eye toward a future beyond that that will continue to improve and has great promise for ending in a much better place than I think any of us could have conceived. So I appreciate the committee's action, and I promise that the administration will keep you informed of all the developments so that you can make prudent decisions in the meetings to come. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Furtado, who has a motion for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Furtado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Superintendent, we are again requesting payment of a prior year expense of, I believe it's $923 that's associated with our van lease, the old vans. As the committee knows, we voted last time to stick with the 5 vans rather than going to 8. So we have ample funding in the lease payment line to pay this prior year expense.
All right. Do we have a motion to, I'll make a motion to send to municipal council for approval to process prior year invoices totaling $923.89 to be paid from the school department funds.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions for Mr. Furtado? No? Okay. Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes, Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
Okay. Motion passes. Mr. Furtado, is that all you have for us tonight?
That is all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Next, we have our minutes from our December 7th, 2020 meeting. A copy of the minutes were circulated with your packet. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions or edits? All right, seeing none. Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Ms. Porto,
yes,
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Motion passes. Next, we have our consent agenda, 5 items. I will consider them as a package. I will read them and then entertain a motion and a roll call vote. Motion to accept a grant from the Box Reebok Foundation in the amount of $9,000 to be deposited in the district gifts and donation account to be used for stipends. 2, motion to accept a grant check from Box Reebok Foundation, Inc. Spring 2020 Box Defender and PA Award for the 5 elementary schools in the amount of $1,500 to be deposited in the district gifts and donation account. Number 3, pursuant to Mass General Laws 53A and a half, motion to accept supply from Walmart with a total value of $356.40 as broken down in the correspondence from Principal Bowles dated December 4th, 2020. 4, motion to accept a payment in the amount of $8.50 from Bay State Textiles to Hill Roberts. And 5, motion to accept a $5,000 donation from the Feinstein Foundation to the Thatcher Elementary School gifts donation line.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Ms. Porto,
yes,
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
All right, motion's passed 9-0. Finally, we have one subcommittee meeting report tonight, teaching and learning, and for that, I will turn it over to Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Withers. This is the report of the regularly scheduled meeting of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee that took place on December 8th. The meeting opened with an update from Assistant Superintendent Regan on the implementation of the rollout of the new ELA program in grades 1 and 2. This was a planned update to the ELA curriculum and was selected at the end of the thorough pilot program that occurred last year. The curriculum of this program was designed to be delivered in the classroom and not in a hybrid or remote learning environment. However, the program's vendor, the Center for Collaborative Literacy, has been a wonderful partner and worked with the district to make the needed modifications to the program that would permit the same amount of success when delivered in a hybrid or remote learning environment. The teachers have given very positive feedback regarding not only their professional development, but their preparedness to run the program for the school year. And they have been reporting great success in students' achievement and general joy of reading, which is great. The majority of the meeting was spent discussing the district's remote ready plans and the difference of the remote plans for a short-term closure versus an extended closure, which is timely. A short-term closure would be unexpected. It may only affect a specific group, such as a snow day, such as what happened when we had to close Brennan Middle School due to staffing issues not so long ago. In circumstances such as this, students would follow their cohort schedules. If the cohort was scheduled to be remote that day, the students would continue to follow their remote schedule and the work assigned to them in Google Classroom. But if their cohort was scheduled to be in person, they would spend most of their time in the remote classroom with their teacher that day, such as what cohort B is going to experience tomorrow. And then if there is an extended closure, that's something that is going to be planned, similar to what happened to the spring, similar as to what we just voted on for this evening. One point that we discussed robustly is how much the district learned about delivering content in the remote environment for a long duration. And as a result, they made adjustments that will provide a better learning experience in the full remote environment. Something of note is that going forward, there's going to be time for full class learning as well as individual learning, as well as small group learning. So although the students may not be in front of their teacher for the whole period of time, they are still going to be working on assignments, and learning will still be taking place. Mr. Greenman, was there anything else you wanted to add to the remote ready plans?
Oh, I think you did a nice job. The teachers have been working on them and getting them ready so that they'll be easy to understand and concise for families once they receive them, and students can follow them pretty easily.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the teachers for all their hard work on making this happen. And we have no motions to bring forward. Any questions? No? Okay. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. All right, thank you again, everyone, for coming to the special meeting on a snow day. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Have a good holiday.
Merry Christmas.
And thank
Holidays.
Thank you.
Good
Merry
night.
Christmas.